فرش التراب يضمني وهو غطاء حول الرمال تلفني بل من وراء واللحد يحكي متى فيها ابتلائي والنور خط كتابه أنسي لقائي فرش التراب يضمني وهو غطائي حول الرمال تلفني بل من ورائي واللحد يحكي ظلمة فيها ابتلائي والنور خط كتابه أنسي لقائي والأهل أين حنانهم باعوا وفائي والصحب أين جموعهم تركوا إخائي والمال أين هناؤه صار ورائي والاسم أين بريقه بين الثناء هذه نهاية حالي فرش التراب يضمني وهو غطائي حول الرمال تلفني بل من ورائي واللحد يحكي ظلمة فيها ابتلاء.
Good evening, everyone. Sincere apologies for the delay. I have been asked why haven't we started, because I very rarely do Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi time. Unfortunately, we have had a delay because Muslim has been delayed on the motorway. Sometimes circumstances dictate what happens. But welcome to Shaikula Restaurant, and welcome to this event. We are very honored actually to have Muslim Beg and his colleagues here today with us. It's a rare opportunity. Let me just tell you something about today's program. Several months ago, I received an email to say that a similar event had taken place in somewhere, I think in London or the South. And it really irritated me that things happen in the South. It's like having, step-brother and sister, the North and the South. So I wrote back and I said, listen guys, why don't you arrange something in the Northwest? I didn't think they would take it up. They did. And I'm so pleased. However, today, of course, most of you know is Good Friday. It's a Christian celebration, and majority of places are closed. We had anticipated that we would hold this event, not in a restaurant. We are eternally grateful to Shaikula for taking this up and providing us this facility. But of course, most of the secular buildings were closed. Last time that Muslim Beg came, it was in Blackburn Cathedral. A wonderful event. You would think that with 44 mosques, somebody would have stood up and said, hello, we have a hall, come and do it here. But then I just remembered that mosques only wash dead bodies and allow men to pray there. 44 mosques and we could not get one. So if any of you that goes to a mosque, you go back and you invite Muslim back. Otherwise you will not be invited back. It's a sad reflection of a Muslim community. When we invited Muslim, it was done on the Women's Voice, actually, are the organisation who asked Mozambique and caged prisoners to come. I'm chair of Women's Voice. I'm just going to take 2 minutes to tell you something about the organisation. Some of you may have heard of Women's Voice. Some of you don't want to know us because we are a bunch of challenging women. And I would like every representative of Women's Voice to put their hand up here. You two men, you are definitely, there's a naughty chair right there for you, Asif. Women's Voice is a group of women who set up an organisation 3 years ago because we believe that everybody has a voice. Nobody's voiceless. We lack platform. We wanted to give women a platform. We are not a Muslim organisation, we are not an Asian organisation, but an organisation that gives platforms to all those who wish to be heard. May know about Prevent. Some of you will need to listen carefully what Prevent is all about. Prevent is very much, for us, a program that has put the Muslim community under the microscope. All headscarves became potential terrorists, and all people with hats and beards, well, I wouldn't want to go in there at all. But if you have heard of this, Assalamu alaikum Muslim, right over here, I'm just talking of you. I thought I might embarrass you a little bit. Good to have you. Assalamu alaikum. Prevent put the Muslim community under the microscope, and we all became potential terrorists. I haven't got a problem with that. I'm a radical, I'm an extremist, so what? But if you can imagine Prevent as a Grogan, as a Medusa, every time you looked at Medusa, at Gorgon, you became a stone. Some of us actually became the mirror and turned Prevent into something else. We did do some good work as well. So I want to tell you today, we're going to have lots of speakers. Please listen to them. You will have opportunities to ask questions. May I ask you, because of shortage of time, to make your question short, to the point. Do not make statements. I have nothing else to say except, may I invite Brother Asim, and I haven't got my glasses, so I'm going to borrow somebody else's glasses to read this. He's the former victim of terrorism policies. No, he's not. I've just realised that. Yes. He is the executive director of Caged Prisoners. Welcome, brother. I'm entitled to the business.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته and good afternoon and evening to you all. Thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you particularly to Sister Anjum for being such a wonderful host. It's not very often that we come to the north, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Maybe the description was quite correct, that maybe I am a victim of terrorism policies, and I think that's the point of today's evening, really, that we want to kind of explain exactly how far terrorism policy in this country has come. That really, unfortunately, the situation that we're in, we're all victims of terrorism policy, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. This is just a sad reality that we face today. I'm just going to start today's proceedings by giving you a landscape of the history, where we come from to where we are today. The other speakers who are far more knowledgeable than I am about these issues will be able to go through some of the details, but I just want to give you a quick overview of how terrorism policy in this country has really developed, especially since 9/11. Even though it predates 9/11 a little bit, I'm going to start with 9/11 as being the kind of intertemporal point that we all know and have come to love, or understand at least anyway. So post 9/11, almost immediately, you had the indefinite detention of a group of foreign nationals. Now, the government came out straight away and said, we're going to detain these people without charge or trial, without giving them any reason. This included people like the now famous Abu Qatada. So he was detained back in 2001. Now, they obviously initially said that these guys are all extremely scary people, that they're involved in terrorism plots, and that they need to be locked up indefinitely. Now, surely, one has to ask oneself that if you think somebody's involved in a plot, the very first thing you want to do is question the individual. You want to find out what they know. Because if they're a security risk to the country, you want to make sure that the plot that they're involved in is cut off. That you've got all the information, that you can stop the attack that's about to take place. Since 2001, and we're now in 2012, the police, MI5, MI6, any other security agency have not asked Abu Qatada or any of the other men who were detained at that time a single question. Not one. Personally, I think we should hold them account for being irresponsible because they claim that these guys were extremely dangerous and involved in plots. Surely the question has to be, if you're involved in a plot, then question them. But the reality is that those guys were the easy targets. They were all foreign nationals, and none of them had British citizenship, and so they were easy targets for the British government. They could say, all right, let's apply this system to these guys because they're all foreigners and we can do that easily to them. If they'd be British citizens, it was going to be far more difficult. So that's really why they had to show that they were doing something post 9/11, and these guys made the easiest of targets. And so it happened that over the next few years there were a number of legal challenges. Alhamdulillah, the House of Lords, in a brilliant judgment, ruled that indefinite detention without charge is not just illegal, it's unconscionable. And so it was struck down, only to be replaced by control orders. So all of those men were placed under a new system of indefinite detention without charge, control orders, where they were effectively locked up in their homes for lengthy periods. The government was challenged on that as well, and they were told that, well, actually, you can't do that. So they said, okay, fine, we can't put them under control orders. So let's deport them back to their countries of origin, even though we know that they're probably going to get tortured there. So the government moved the entire process from a criminal process to a civil process. Why a civil process? They invented this civil process because in the civil process, you don't need the same standard of evidence. They could bring in secret evidence for the first time. And this was a start for something very, very dangerous. You might have seen in the media, there's been a lot of stuff about the government bringing in secret evidence, plans for secret evidence. It already exists. It already exists today against Muslim terrorism suspects, whether they're British citizens or not. The government can use control orders, or now it's known as TPIMs, Terrorism Prevention Investigative Measures, in order to lock people up in their homes, in order to deport them, while claiming that they don't have to present the evidence because it's a matter of national security. That currently exists today. 7/7 made matters so much worse for us, because effectively they came out and said, actually, we've got a major problem here. Our problem is, it's deep-rooted. It's about integration, it's about isolation, it's about all of these kind of buzzwords that they're coming up with, buzzwords that I'm sure people of Blackburn are very, very familiar with, because you lived those words. They were talking about, effectively, cities like Blackburn, when they were talking like this. Your own MP, Jack Straw, is he still the MP? Yeah? No, he can't. Okay, sorry, Charlotte, I knew you would have been.
Still a man of straw.
Okay, just another straw. So, the conversation began to shift at that time. So it just wasn't about plots anymore. Now it was slowly shifting towards, actually, no, what is the value of Muslims in the UK? What do they bring to the table? Who are they? Why are they relevant to our society? Surely they should play a bigger role. And you saw that increase over the years to the extent that Jack Straw quite easily comes out with quite inflammatory statements like, people in niqab can't express themselves. I've got two sister-in-laws. My wife doesn't wear the niqab, but my sister-in-laws do. One of them she cannot hide anything behind that niqab. She's the most expressive person that I know, really. It's quite amazing how much you can express from behind a niqab, but it's true. Okay, and you just need to have a conversation with somebody who wears a niqab for 2 minutes to know that actually you can learn a lot from that. So even the kind of rhetoric that was coming out was deeply offensive, it was deeply Islamophobic. Okay, that's been going on for a number of years. The problem is we haven't challenged the underlying basis of a lot of these assumptions. And that's where a lot of these policies come from. That some, smart aleck somewhere says, well, actually Muslims, they believe X, Y, and Z, and that then forms the basis for policy. Now Muslims haven't integrated. Who says we haven't integrated? What is the statistical analysis? What is the data that proves that we have not integrated into the society? And who said it wasn't us who integrated? Maybe it was other communities who disintegrated, who chose not to be part of those communities anymore because they saw a bunch of Asian people moving into their areas and they thought to themselves, oh God, what's going on here? And decided to move elsewhere. Surely that actually proves a lack of integration on their part. So there are things that the underlying assumptions that are made in terms of these policies have never been successfully challenged. And I think we need to start thinking about some of those things in a far more sophisticated way than we have been. So initially, there was more emphasis on plots. There were certain operations like the Old Trafford plot, which turned out to be false, the Rice-In plot, which turned out to be false, that there was never any Rice-In, Old Trafford, there was never any plot. The one example that we have, or two examples that we have of a successful police investigation that led to trials and convictions are Operation Crevice and also the airline plot. Both of them are examples of cases which could have been conducted under the normal criminal justice system without any of the kind of legislation that we have today, without any of the counter-terrorism policies. If the police just used all the powers that they had pre-9/11, they would have secured the same convictions in those plots. This is just the reality that we face. But the problem is that those two examples form the basis of so many of the kind of policies that we see today. So we had the first version of Prevent, which the Labour government brought in. And this was effectively about throwing money at a problem. They said Muslims haven't integrated, once again, an assumption. So they threw money at all these Muslim organizations and non-Muslim organizations that will solve this problem for us. You guys can go ahead and do it. So all of these organizations took the money and they did nothing with it. Why? Because they didn't, first of all, understand the communities that they were trying to serve. And also they didn't know how to deal with the problem itself, because the only way you got that money is by feeding into the rhetoric that the government was coming along with in the first place, which meant that you automatically alienated yourself from the very communities that need to be helped in the first place. So the whole exercise was self-defeating. That was the problem with the first Prevent strategy, that effectively organizations such as, for example, the Quilliam Foundation were given large sums of money, but for what purpose? For them to go around saying, well, we've got a big problem, and for the communities that actually needed support and needed help, they turn around and say, you don't represent me. You know nothing about my life. And this was the fundamental failure with that program. But unfortunately, when the coalition government came in and promised to change the Prevent strategy, they completely missed the mark, despite saying all the right things. They said, we're going to get rid of the Prevent strategy, we're going to come up with a new program that's going to be much better, it's going to be far more sophisticated, it's going to actually understand the problem, and they managed to score yet another own goal. They have turned the entire issue into an ideological one. All you need to do is read the Prevent strategy, and that becomes patently clear. It is purely about ideology now. They say before they were talking about preventing violent extremism, preventing the violent acts. Okay, something that most of us would get behind and say, okay, yeah, we do want to stop violent acts taking place. But that whole agenda has now moved. It's moved towards preventing extremism, full stop. But extremism according to who? That's the question. Who has defined extremism? What does it mean? And what are the assumptions that are being made in terms of who is an extremist? Is it extremist in terms of how you look? Is it extremist in terms of what your religious beliefs are? Is it extremist in terms of what your political beliefs are? So when I've got people across the community coming to me and saying, I got stopped at an airport and asked about my beliefs in Palestine, about my beliefs on Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, what is that all that about? That is the ideology taking root, the ideological aspects of this taking root within the way that they're conducting their affairs. Okay, they are trying to systematically alienate us. And don't get me wrong, okay, from one perspective you might say, okay, that might be quite a useful tool. But this mechanism, this technique is applied across the board. Whether you have a beard that comes down to here, you have no beard at all, whether you wear the hijab or don't wear the hijab. I've had all sorts of people, even people who claim that they're practically atheist in their belief, but just have a Muslim name, saying that they've been questioned about this kind of thing. So, we all know our own communities. And there's nobody in this room, I'm sure, who will say there is such a thing as the Muslim community. We are Muslim communities. We have differences amongst us. We have many differences in our belief, in our culture, in our societies, and we're the first to recognize that. We understand who we are. But from the perspective of victimhood, you have to be real. We are one community. They don't care if you're Shia, if you're Sunni, if you're Salafi, Ashari, Wahhabi, this, that, or the other, the Yobandi. They don't give a damn. Okay? When you go through that port, you are treated exactly the same way. So we have to finally recognize that from a victim perspective, we are a community. And thus, we need to have a community response to these issues. We have to realize that, in fact, the only way we're going to be able to do this is coming together and saying, actually, no, your policies are wrong. They're not conscionable. They go against the very, what you believe in and what we believe in. Okay, what this society believes in, whether it's Muslim or not. And that's how we need to work against it. Because so far, unfortunately, we haven't had that kind of joined up thinking. Now, Prevent Mark II, as I said, is completely about ideology. And we've had two recent cases. One of Munir Faruqi, and we have Munir Faruqi San Khalis who's going to speak to us today, so I'm going to let him go through the details of that case with you. But also a case of a guy named Ahmed Faraz from Birmingham, who was convicted of selling books. And these books are modern and historical classics. Okay, books by people like Sayyid Qutb, who many of us will have his books on our bookshelves, you know, people like Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, and even Sheikh Islam ibn Taymiyyah. You know, these are books that so many Muslims have on their shelves, even if you agree with them or not. You know, I know plenty of people who have these books and they don't even disagree with some of what's written in them. But the reality is he was convicted for selling these books because it was purely about ideology. You don't agree with what these books say. They're books. Books don't tell you to go around killing people. Okay? But unfortunately, the government has gone so far in its plans that it's now started to convict people of that kind of thing. They're now charging people with listening to lectures. Just a few days ago, we had a guy who was picked up, who was being charged because he possesses Anwar al-Awlaki's 44 ways of supporting the jihad. I've read that document. Had that brother owned that document during the 80s, when brothers from the UK were going off to Afghanistan to fight with the Mujahideen, he would have been told, that's great, that's a brilliant document, that's something that we very much support. Had that brother been caught with that document during the 90s, when the genocide was taking place in Bosnia, and brothers were going from the UK to fight in Bosnia, he would have been told the same thing, that it's totally fine. It's only because policy has changed that now it's illegal for him to have this thing. So, we have to start questioning where the policies come from, how they're formed, rather than simply going with the rhetoric that they come up with. I mean, you just have to read the documents to realize that actually the very starting point that they come from is one that's alien to us. For example, they use terms like Islamism, jihadism. 1400 years of intense intellectual rigor within the Islamic world. We've never described ourselves using these terms, but yet we've been forced to put these labels upon ourselves
you know, even though we've never used them. We should be describing from our own perspective the phenomenon of terrorism. We should be describing ourselves the phenomenon of extremism, because we're the ones who understand it the best. We've known our religion for 1400 years. They've only been studying it for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you know, in depth. This phenomenon is completely new to them. Whereas we understand these things, and yet we still use their rhetoric in order to self-describe. The prevent strategy is unfortunately a new one, and we've got more experts here, but it's scary because it effectively comes into every single aspect of our lives. If you're feeling a bit down one day, feeling a bit depressed, and you go to your GP has been told to report you because you are susceptible to radicalization as a young man. This is part of what the strategy tells GPs to do. If you're in university, and I studied international law at university, okay, and I studied the laws of armed conflict and the use of force, so I studied warfare effectively, okay. My lecturer now would be told that if I'm debating too much about Muslim conflicts, that they should report me for effectively being too radical and talking about radical things. This is where we've got to now with this new strategy, that every single part of our life is going to be scrutinized. So it's very important that, you know, we wake up to what is going on out there and really take heed, because unfortunately this is going to affect every single aspect of our lives, and unless we take an extremely strong stance against it, it's really going to hurt us quite badly, as more and more of our young people get arrested and get charged over extremely minor offences, over things which should be a rite of passage for most people. It should be something that they grow up trying to learn and understand who they are, what they believe in. Watching videos online doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go and blow something up, but it's more of a rite of passage that you should learn what's going on out in the world and make up your own mind. And, you know, and speak to people about these things. But rather, instead of being told, if you watch a video online, you know, you should be prosecuted for it because you're obviously an extremist, because you're obviously going to commit some act of terrorism. You know, it's a completely strange scenario. In that case, every single person who listens to gangster rap should be convicted for effectively being the next potential gangster, next drug dealer, next whatever. It's the same type of logic. But nobody's thinking about it from that perspective because everybody's so scared of the label terrorism. As I said, inshallah, we've got people who are far more knowledgeable about these things than I am speaking, so I'm going to stop here. But I really want to say Jazakallah khair for taking time out of your own kind of time off away from work to come and listen to us, and I really appreciate that. Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And he is a former victim of terrorism policies, and I'll let him tell you a bit more about that.
Thank you very much to Cage Prisoners for inviting me, and thank you all for coming today. You look a lot more intimidated from here. If I was an intelligence officer, I would definitely report the bunch of you. There could be some comedy stand-up while I'm here. I think it always lightens up the evening. It's a pretty depressing subject area, one that I have been now looking at over 3.5, coming on almost 4 years next month. My name is Rizwan Sabir. I was a postgraduate master's student at the University of Nottingham. In 2008, I possessed a book that you can buy from W.H. Smith's or Blackwell's. It was erroneously titled The Al-Qaeda Training Manual. It can be purchased for £20, and it was given that title by the United States Department of Justice, who tried to sex up the name in order to convict people who were on trial in New York for the East Africa bombings in 1998. I was arrested. I was held for 7 days. My entire life was turned upside down. My house was raided. A friend of mine who was helping me with my research was also arrested. His life was also turned around. And by a stroke of, let's just say, divine intervention, I was released without charge. Now, I was released without charge not because I was innocent, because that's not important when you are in custody for suspected terrorism. I was released without charge because the evidence against me suggested, or I should say rather, a woman by the name of Samina Malik who's known as a lyrical terrorist, was going through the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal turned around and said, at this moment in time, we cannot tell you what the remit of the offence, this offence is. So the police turned around and said, well, Samina Malik's in court. We don't know really what the issue with the legislation is. If we charge him, the potential is that the Crown Prosecution Service, when we get to court, will throw this out and we will be embarrassed. So let's release Sabir without charge. So after 7 days of being in solitary confinement, it was an operation handled by the West Midlands Counter-Terrorism Unit, very intricately involved with MI5, along with all the other regional counter-terrorism units. I was released, and I was released just like that, to say, off you go now, you can go and carry on with your life, as in nothing had happened. Now, I probably look it, and I am a pretty traditional kind of normal guy from a Pakistani background. My parents are law-abiding citizens. They were subjected to the horrors of political policing, and I can only sympathise with them to an extent that if ever you have experienced it, you will understand. But my sympathy still goes out to my mother, who still worries and absolutely hates what I do. And what do I do? That's a good question, because a lot of people still suspect me of being some kind of subversive. In fact, I've had it from reliable sources that senior ranking police officers in this country still believe that I am a terrorist. They also believe that I was a terrorist pretending to be a student, but was disruptive in the way. And the reality of the fact is that Britain that we live in today, after especially the London bombings, if you are a Muslim, you are guilty of being a potential terrorist. And that is what prompted me to do what I do today. What do I do today? Well, the response was simple. Do I just take what happened to me as an unfortunate set of circumstances and move on? Or what do I do? And naturally, my response was to read, which is what I was doing at the time anyway. I was researching Al-Qaeda, which is why I had this document in the first place. I was comparing the military tactics of two organizations, Al-Qaeda and Hamas. So I carried on, and now my interest turned to domestic counter-terrorism. And I came completely newly to the whole counter-terrorism debate in Britain. Prevent in 2008 meant absolutely nothing to me. It was a word in the English dictionary. So I started reading. I started reading quickly. I was restarting my PhD at a different university where I was looking at domestic counter-terrorism. Now, I know we're strapped for time and I don't want to talk for too long. But what I'm going to tell you now is basically 3.5 years worth of thinking condensed into 10 to 12 points. So 3.5 years worth of thinking and experience in here to share with you in 10 minutes. I hope I can do the issue of justice. Now, Asim touched on some very, very good points about the concept of books and ideological shifts and paradigm shifts that have allowed the state to marginalise and criminalise possession of documentation such as the 44 Ways to Conduct Jihad, which I accessed yesterday and read it after I heard about this case, along with various other military training manuals on the internet, which I'm sure, if there's any informers or police officers here, which I'm sure they're not, you can report that and I'll do my time for it, because the point is now that we are fighting on the basis of principle. And the principle is that as long as the state tells me I live in a modern liberal democracy, then I also treat it as I live in a modern liberal democracy. And if that means going to prison for my beliefs, well then it's a good way to catch up on all the reading that I need. So prevent. Now prevent is split into two parts. The first part was in 2007 when the funding was given to various Muslim organizations, many of them who had absolutely no idea what was going on. Many of them had an idea but didn't care. There were allegations, and there still are allegations, some of them that I have made, of corruption, of systemic malpractice, etc., etc. I'm sure you're familiar with them. But then what happened in 2011 when the new government came in was a shift. And that shift, as Asim said, turned into ideology. And that is essentially what the new Prevent program is based on. Now, if you have a look at the allegations that arose in 2009, when the Institute of Race Relations, Arun Kadunani or Vikram Dutt of The Guardian made, I remember sat there at my computer one day before the allegations came out into the public domain, thinking, is something not quite right about Prevent? And the next day the allegations arose that it's being used to spy and gather information and intelligence. And I remember reading the article thinking, okay, this is only part of the answer. There is still more to it, because collecting information on your political attitudes isn't the kind of information and intelligence that we would expect covert or MI5 type agents to be collecting, really, if you think about it. So I started looking into the whole kind of intelligence world and how information is gathered and why it's gathered. Now, the new Prevent strategy talks about localized, well, Prevent's always talked about local solutions. So there's a military phrase that says, think globally, act locally. And the reason is because we are involved in a global war, a war on terror. And that is intricately connected to the Prevent program, which is carried out here on the streets of Blackburn and Lancashire. So what you need to think globally, when you've got that in the back of your head and you are acting locally, is you need localized intelligence and information. How do you get access to localized information and intelligence? Well, this country has something called neighborhood policing. As you all probably know, the friendly beat bobby that walks down the road, has a conversation with you, comes to the mosque with you and has a cup of tea with you, he is involved in something called neighborhood policing, understanding the community that he polices. Now, every time you speak to him, he's not there merely to listen to what you have to say because he likes you or is interested. He probably does like you. I like many police officers who are very nice people. He's there to connect something called community intelligence. And community intelligence is the community working proactively with the police service in order to determine where the problem comes from. What is the problem? The problem is young Muslim men predominantly and some women who are quite angry at the way that the world is running, and rightfully so. Now that information has no real value. What it does have is a value that allows you to map a community, to know what that community is thinking. Now if you know what a community is thinking, then you know exactly how to target that community. So what happens with that information that's collected? Well, firstly, it's put onto a criminal intelligence file, some of it. And I can say that so confidently because I have access to my intelligence files, which are sat at home right now, which says that I have been accessing Facebook and MSN, even though I'm not on Facebook, and I've been stirring up emotions that are anti-Western, anti-police, and I'm accused of spreading anti-Western propaganda. By speaking the way I do and by doing what I do through my academic work, I write for The Guardian, and that article was published in the intelligence file. Oh, I beg your pardon. The entry that I had written on The Guardian was logged on an intelligence file. So now when people or Muslims write in the public domain on national newspapers, that is also logged. This is how severe the intelligence gathering is. And that information, by the way, can be shared with any European law enforcement agency. So that means that if the Germans or the French or the Spanish want information, then legally the police in Britain are allowed to share that information. So, all this local information, for example in Blackburn, it's all collected. We know there's some trouble causes in the community, which is, by the way, when it was rolled out, Prevent was in 2007, it wasn't an accident. Everyone says, oh, we didn't really know what we were doing with the program, so we had to target it everywhere. No, the reality is that we knew where the problem came from, but we didn't have any hard evidence. So how do you get that hard evidence? Well, if you roll the program out to the entire Muslim community, then when your reports come back, or what was called then the N135, the national indicator, well, that tells you exactly where most of the problem is. And where most of the problems were in schools, colleges, and universities. Now, these are the three institutions, or the three sectors, that have now been selected under the new Prevent program. So when you turn around to me and say, oh, we didn't really know where to target the Prevent program, but now we know where it is, well, to me, it says that, no, you knew exactly who your target was, but you needed some kind of evidence. And remember, policy form operates on some form of evidence. You need some kind of evidence to justify the existence of a policy or a program. Now we have that information, now we have focused on universities and schools and colleges. So, bringing it back to Blackburn, what happens to the information that the local beat body picks up? It's logged onto a criminal intelligence file, but something else happens to it. It's processed into a national system called Project Rich Picture. I don't know how many people have heard of this project, but this is a joint police and military intelligence 5, MI5 program, which has allegedly up to 8,000 people under some form of surveillance. Now, the program is quite simple. It's covert in various aspects. People don't like talking about it. They don't like divulging any information about it, including senior police officers who I have now been banging my head against a brick wall trying to get someone to speak to me about this project, but they won't, which then increases my questions, or the seriousness of my questions, of why are you hiding all this information if it's such a benign project. Now, the project is basically just how you have neighbourhood policing about local drug dealers that's then fed up. Well, in counter-terrorism, we have Rich Picture. And we have Rich Picture, and that allows us to understand who is the most restless, who is involved in spreading propaganda that is anti-government and pro-Islamist, pro-Islamist or pro-jihadist or whatever it is, and who the agitators are. Now, when you understand the Muslim community and where the problem comes from, then you can target your programs more effectively. And that's common logic, it's basic sense. That if I know that a 3-year-old is causing a problem, then I'm going to directly go to a 3-year-old and speak to him rather than go to a 7, 8, and 12-year-old, because you know where the problem is. So, I'm running out of time. I have 3 minutes left, and I've got 2 years' worth of research to share with you. That then allows the police and MI5 to target those towns and cities which have the most noise or the most agitators. But when you have so many eyes and ears on a community, which naturally you do in the Muslim community, especially in areas like Blackburn, then what happens? Then naturally people get suspicious. Naturally more people will fall victim of counter-terrorism powers. Now, it's not very difficult to fall victim to counter-terrorism powers. If you've ever read the legislation, you will quickly realise that the police do not, I repeat, do not require evidence to arrest you. What they require is a reasonable suspicion. And a reasonable suspicion could be based on the fact that the police officer who saw you that morning didn't like the scarf you were wearing because he associated it with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Now, if you want to hold that police officer to account for a misrepresented reasonable suspicion, or a reasonable suspicion that wasn't at all reasonable, then you have to fight him in court. That's what happens. And when I was arrested because I was a brown man who had a beard. When I brought civil proceedings against the police for my wrongful arrest and detention, I fought it for 3.5 years. And in the end, I had an out-of-court settlement in which I was paid £20,000 in damages, and my legal fees, which in total amount to in excess of £100,000. Now, that took me 3.5 years to fight. And if anybody has ever fought a legal case or a civil battle, will know how much blood, sweat, tears, and energy actually goes into it. It's one of the most difficult things you will do because it's so much pressure and strain. And when you are fighting a system which is based purely on politicized policing, then it's even tougher. I'm presuming I've got a minute now.
Well, you had a minute left.
Say again?
Yes, you had a minute left.
I had a minute left, right. I'm now in extra time, so bear with me. So what happens when the information is given, MI5 operate? Now, a source who works within the police told me recently that I was arrested because MI5 put pressure on the West Midlands Counter-Terrorism Unit to arrest me. Now, when he told me, that didn't make sense to me. Why would MI5 apply pressure on the police to arrest me? It's me. But the MI5 don't see it that way, because MI5 is a completely unaccountable body. You try writing to them and asking them a question, they won't answer your question. You try taking them to court, and they're not going to turn up in court. You try and get evidence of some kind that they have, and they won't give it to you. The reality is that the security services in this country are completely unaccountable bodies. Now, they work in political spheres. So when we require the threat level to go up, or we need to reinforce a policy which is connected to a foreign intervention in Libya or whatever, or in Iraq or Afghanistan, then we can turn around and pretend that there's a threat. Now, the reality is, you can't, and neither can I, check the intelligence. And intelligence, by its very nature, is inaccurate. And this intelligence is then used to make arrests. And the reason why the arrest power of the Terrorism Act doesn't say you need evidence, because there is no evidence. It's intelligence. And intelligence, by its nature, is grossly, grossly inaccurate. So, to sum up, even though Prevent came out initially in 2007, it's drastically changed now because the attention is now on what the hard-reg interventions or the Channel Project, as you probably all know about anyway. But again, it's not an accident. It's not an accident. What we have now is I have information where senior police officers have told me in this country that when an individual is subjected to a channel intervention, what they speak to their mentor can be used as evidence against them to secure a conviction. That's very substantial, because when an individual who is 17 years of age sits in a room and speaks his heart and says, I am angry about the world for X, Y, and Z reasons, that mentor there can use that information which he has shared in confidence with the Crown Prosecution Service and the police to send that individual to prison. So the reality is, when did Prevent become pursued? It's always been like that. It's always been like that. All the information and all the allegations about spying and all the rest of it have been fed into this national system, which is Prevent, Pursue, Protect, and Protect, the whole contest strategy.
An undercover officer called Simon, he approached me on my market store. I'm a market trader by profession, and my father's Dawa store was literally right next to the market. So the Dawa store took place on a Wednesday, Saturday, and a Sunday. For 3 days I'd be working, so the UCOs, they come across where the UCOs took this to their advantage, where they'd visit the Dawa store for a few minutes, then come to me, and vice versa, just collecting evidence. He come to me to work when I was parking on my stall, and we were just talking generally about weddings in Pakistan and how the so-called Pakis decide to use cheap fireworks by firing guns in the air and not buying fireworks. So while we're in discussion, the conversation has drifted to normal daily routine, to violence, and then to weddings. And while we're discussing this, I had a market bar in my hand while I was taking my stall down. For some reason, I just posed with it as if it's a rifle. And the UCO, he obviously had a camera on himself, and he recorded all the information, and this was used against me in the court, where I was indirectly trying to radicalize this individual by showing just off-the-cuff kind of remark, really. On another occasion, myself and the undercover officer were having breakfast in my house, and they were just generally talking about his daily routine. And he pulled his phone out and said, Harris, I'm trying to learn the prayer, and I've got this recording on my phone. So he played it, and it was really fast in the recitation, and he insisted that I gave him a DVD that would help him in his prayers, which I did. And then I gave him a Fortress of a Muslim, which is a well-known book in literally every other household. And he told me that he didn't have a hi-fi system to actually play the DVD on the disc. So I gave him a hi-fi system just as a present, which any Muslim would do to unusually leave it. This half an hour to 40-minute kind of conversation and gathering with him was taken out of context in the courts, and it was said that I was indirectly trying to radicalize and groom him by giving him a Quran CD and a hi-fi system which he asked for himself. The jokes and the jokes and the case is difficult to summarize because there's approximately 80 to 90 barrage files filled with evidence. So I just want to pinpoint really the way they've taken the whole case out of context and given my father 4 life sentences and the other brothers lengthy sentences as well.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Congratulations to Sister Anjum for organising this event. And that Prevent sort of, or hinted that Prevent evolved. Actually, the government always knew what they were doing with Prevent. It was always about reforming Islam and criminalising the Muslim community. Now, there are a few fundamental flaws which meant that it was always going to go down this route. Come up with terms like extremism and radicalism, which have no legal definition, and they've added them to things called terrorism, which are legally defined. So they've actually criminalised things which are not unlawful, and you can see that being played out in the court. The other thing that they've done in the Prevent policy is an individual commits a crime, you don't target an entire community for the actions of one person. What they've done here, not only have they targeted an entire community within the Prevent, they've actually covered and targeted every aspect of Muslim life. So from schools, from women, from universities, from youth work, the whole ambit of Muslim life, from madrasas, from mosques, every aspect has been covered by Prevent. And they've got projects that are addressing all these issues. So the entire Muslim community has been targeted by Prevent. And people have taken money thinking, oh well, we'll take the money, we'll do some good works with it, and not realising that this was always going to produce the effect of criminalising Muslim ideas and beliefs. And what they've done in the first stages, they came up with what looked like innocuous projects, but actually, even they had a purpose behind them. So the mapping that the brother spoke about, I mean, do you know that Blackburn has been mapped? Have you seen the mapping report that the council produced here? What they do under the false pretenses of research into Muslim needs, they produced a mapping exercise which maps every mosque and tells you what background, what sect, where it's located, what political ideology that mosque has. I mean, it's produced by the Institute of Community Cohesion, Ted Cantell's group. So you can find it, or ask your council to give you a copy. And look at the diagram at the back. It's a very interesting diagram. And a lot of that research goes to the police. A lot of the facts and figures, the coordinators for Prevent are usually based and employed by the local police. And they've also done something which is a lot worse. The idea that extremism, as they define it, and the ideas for what constitutes extremism are all drawn from neocon think tanks. And what they've done with those is, and they draw it, first of all, if you look at the diagram, it tells you how it's actually working. So the ideas are produced by think tanks, then the media. You might think that a media focus on an extremist is just an innocuous thing, but what they're actually doing is they're reinforcing all these ideas, saying he's an extremist, his idea is an extremist, this mosque is extremist, they're saying this, they're saying that. Then what tends to happen is that is then found within the ideas within the Prevent policy. So they're defining extremism, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And what they've done is that has actually now found itself in the court. So the terrorism laws, you have two aspects to it. You have part of the terrorism laws that deal with plots, which, fine, everybody wants to deal with people who are committing or planning to commit crimes. But then there's a whole section of the terrorism laws that are called the thought crime section, which makes possession of videos, articles, websites, terrorism. And the whole thinking behind that is drawn from the ideas produced within Prevent. And these are now being played out in the courts. And you're getting these horrendous prosecutions. and banning through the back door of books like Milestones, DVDs that were produced to show the horrors of what's happening in the Muslim world. And these are increasing. So very innocuous things, such as the downloading of information, an article in your possession, are now being classed as terrorist material. So they're setting precedents. So once somebody has been defined, or their works have been defined as terrorist material, logically, if you're found in possession of them, you're going to get caught up in that. So instead of having a debate through the normal consultative process, which is Parliament, saying these books should be banned, they're a threat to security. What they're doing, they're banning and doing things through the back door. And what's worse is what's being played out in the court is also happening through something called the Channel Programme. Now, you need to find out about the Channel Programme. There's a bit in the report. It affects all your children because this is being played out in school. So just as a person can be reading something and end up in the court, if your child says something in school, an example, supports the Palestinians and feels sorry for what's happening to them, that might be seen as a sign of potential radicalisation, and you get sent off to this Channel Programme. And thousands of children, thousands of people have been referred, many very young children. Now, do you know that this policy is operating in your schools, in your local authority? You should be asking these questions. What are the rights of these children, who are being referred? Are their parents told? Are they allowed to have a legal representative? Because these kids are going to have an intelligence file for life, and this is going to affect them. And now, what they've done in the new Prevent, they've extended that Channel Programme to the health sector. So now you could be going to your GP, and you might be having, certain problems. You might have decided to grow a beard, or you might make a comment. Your GP can now refer you, or your consultant in a hospital can now refer you to the Channel Programme as somebody who is potentially on the road to terrorism or being groomed to terrorism. So there's a lot going on, brothers and sisters, with this whole Prevent policy. You need to be alert. Please don't bury your heads and walk away from this, because this is what I said years and years ago to people. This will come to you. It affects your children when they go to university. It affects your children at school. Don't hide away from it. We need to speak out. And don't, the idea that you should get involved with everything that the government does. We should be a lot more smarter than that. As a community, if something is bad and has a bad impact on our community, we should be strong enough to say, we don't want to be part of this, we won't get involved with this, and we should ask questions from the local authorities and the departments that are implementing this. Jazakallah khair. I hope we'll have a lot more time to discuss these things.
Alhamdulillah, in the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, just like to thank Sister Entrapment, who has always hosted us very amazingly when we come to Blackburn. Nobody for us except Allah. And the point of saying this is because whether the Western world recognizes it or not, whether they accept it or not, in the Islamic world there is a revolution not just on a political level, but a revolution of the mind. Which means and says that which you prevented us for the past 100 or so years, we are returning back to like a magnet. And whether you like it or not, what we have chosen, despite your attempt at impeding our progress, we are returning to our faith, and in it we find the solutions for our society. We have tried all of the other isms, different methods of ruling, and they have all failed. And they failed because you, the Western world, were the ones backing them. You are the ones who supported the Mubaraks of this world, the Ben Alis of this world, the Gaddafis of this world, and by extension, as we know through Cage Prisoners' work and others, you were supporting and working hand in hand with Hafiz al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad when it suited you. I met prisoners, or former prisoners, who are now working again with the resistance, who were held in Sednaya, in Farah, which are the famous places, so infamous in fact, that the Americans, when they held me in Baghran, they used to torture me and say, if you don't cooperate with us, we'll send you to Syria or to Egypt. And the British were fully aware of this. The British intelligence agents were fully aware of this. So they knew that if you want to torture somebody badly, you send them to Syria. If you want them to disappear, perhaps to Egypt. If you want the razor blades taken to their body, you send them to Morocco, as what happened with the Yemen. So the point in telling you this, my brothers and sisters, is this. We've documented how people were kidnapped by the Americans with British complicity and handed over to Syria where they were disappeared. In fact, part of our work still to this day is investigating what happened to those individuals. People here held in British prisons who were tortured and beaten, and evidence, we believe, extracted from torture was used to continue either their detention or put them on control orders, the likes of which Britain has never had before, and of course the evidence is secret. But there's also some hope, because we're constantly slammed on our heads with the hammer of you are a terrorism or a suspected terrorist community. But we've been here before, as you know, in terms of the United Kingdom, with the Irish community and so forth. In fact, if you look at it this way, the most well-respected man on the planet, and arguably the most well-recognized man on the planet, is Nelson Mandela, who is a convicted terrorist. He was convicted and served 27 odd years in prison, mostly in Robben Island, for being part of Spears of the Nation, which was a military wing of the ANC. But who looks at Mandela today as a terrorist? And in fact, just if you think that's far away, look across the border, look across the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland, and you'll see Deputy First Minister, former member, high-ranking member, leader, in fact, of the IRA, the Provisional IRA, which brought more havoc and devastation to the streets of this country than any one of us ever could have done. The reason why is this. When they invaded Iraq, the British intelligence service said that the likelihood of terrorism in this country is going to go up. Why did they make that statement? Why did they come to that conclusion? Simple analysis. Basic analysis. If you're going to invade a country, and you're going to do it on a mandate which is illegal, which is immoral, then those people in your own country that are related to it are going to be upset. And if that wasn't bad enough, many of us here are from Pakistan. And Pakistan has been created, made into a place, I say, by the Western policy, as a place that has dealt with its own population, with imprisonment, torture, disappearance, the likes of which has never happened before, even in the history of Pakistan, which doesn't have the best of human rights records. But it's happened because of what Britain and the United States has done. Therefore, when they're talking about preventing the radicalization policy, think about this. Before, in the past, it was always about external policy. What are they doing abroad? What are they doing in the countries that Muslims are somehow associated with? But then they introduced a series of anti-terror legislation in this country, the likes of which we have never seen, and started to radicalize or to make the population in this country upset, mostly from the Muslim community, to introduce the Glorification of Terrorism Act in 2006, where people are being convicted for either writing poetry or, as you've heard, for writing and publishing books, for goodness sake, in the land of Shakespeare and Wordsworth. Amazing. And they tell us to integrate. And we do integrate. And we have these books published in the English language so people can debate and discuss its content. But for some people, it it's just too much. In fact, in the famous words of George Orwell in his Animal Farm, he said, everybody's equal, but some people are more equal than others. Clearly we see that these policies and this attempt to put us into a corner is beginning to work in one sense, but in the other sense, as Brother Janti has said, it is quite amazing to see large numbers of Muslims and others around the country recognize what's taking place. It's also important, and the final thing that I would probably leave you with is that with my travels across the world and elsewhere, I've been to Tunisia, to Libya, to Egypt, to, as I said, to the border of Syria. One common factor I found across these places, especially during and after the revolutions, it's the prisoners who are leading the countries. It's the prisoners. If you look at who's being nominated now by the Muslim Brotherhood, Khayr al-Shadr, as their candidate, the candidate for their party, he spent 20 years in prison as part of a banned, quote-unquote, terrorist organization. And Noor, Hizb al-Noor, the Noor party, that has taken 20% of the vote, includes members or former members of Jamaat al-Jihad, of Jamaat al-Islamiyya, organizations that were banned and are still banned in this country. What do you do about this? Somebody step forward and tell me, what do you do about this? Are you going to do to them what you did to Hamas and say we boycott them as well? Or are you going to come to the level of reasoning and say, understand, hold on. We should have entered into discussion with these people a long, long time ago and recognized them, rather than try to force our agenda upon them abroad, as we're trying to do to our population here, and force it upon them here. It won't work. It will not work. But what it requires from you, brothers and sisters, is your constant support. And I've said this often in terms of our case, the former Guantanamo prisoners. In 1998, a man from the MI5 turned up at my house. 5 o'clock in the morning, with 2 other people. And they questioned me. It was 1998, before the war on terror began. About an individual who they said was an alleged member of a terrorist group. He's a friend of mine who's been beaten and tortured in Dubai and written to me from there, said, please get me a lawyer to help me out of my predicament. And that's when I first went to see my lawyer, Karen Pierce, and she told me, I'm sorry, Mazam, it was the Irish versus you next. And from that point onwards, that same individual who came into my house then turned up in Bagram when I was kidnapped by US and Pakistani agents. He turned up in Kandahar and he turned up in Guantanamo Bay. Same individual. I'll never forget him. But when I returned, like the other Guantanamo prisoners, we said we're going to hold these people to account. And we fought them in the courts. And we continue to fight them. So that for the first time in British history, we've caused the British police to investigate MI5. For the first time in the history of this country. And it was a group of Muslims, terrorism suspects, who made this happen. So we say, in caged prisoners, they may be watching us, we're watching them right back. Jazakallah khair.
آمنت بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره من الله والبعث بعد الموت لا إله إلا الله آمنت بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره من الله والبعث بعد الموت لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول